there's a lot of noise.
Yes.
From podcasts to people giving you advice to newsletters telling you how you can run your business better. It's a lot of information to digest, and you don't have the time for it. You will find ways to get into your craft and get really good at it, but don't try to be that perfect person, because there's no such thing.
And that's Sophie Blake of Sophie Blake NY, where we spoke about surviving as a brick-and-mortar business during the pandemic, being a cautious optimist with realistic expectations, and managing IVF as an entrepreneur. It's vulnerable, it's uplifting, and it's up next on Hustle and Grind.
So tell us about your company and what you do and why it's so cool.
I'm the founder and creative director of Sophie Blake NY, and we are a women's lifestyle brand. My focus is women's jewelry and home goods. And then we also have a brick and mortar right outside of DC. It's in Fairfax, Virginia, and Mosaic. So if you ever get a chance to visit, definitely come out and see us. And I started the company out of New York, hence the New York, and we do all of our production there. So we hand make everything in New York.
Oh, that's awesome. I've been to the Mosaic District is popping now. I'm from not too far away from there, and it's amazing. Like I was there a few years ago, and all of a sudden it's like very happening. So that's so cool. So you have a brick and mortar storefront there.
That is correct. So we've had the store since end of 2014, and it was considered a pop-up when we started. It was supposed to be a 6-month project, and then it just continue to go on, and I realized 6 years later I'm still in it.
That's great.
So having a brick and mortar right now, I think everyone, the pandemic has affected everybody so hard. How has it affected your business, and how have you pivoted and changed to change with the pandemic ways?
So you're absolutely right, Joy. Brick and mortar right now is really hurting because most people have gotten used to shopping online, and also like the culture of shopping has changed as well. So when everything happened, it happened obviously very quickly. We had to make a quick decision. We actually ended up closing our store even before the government had the mandate to close all the stores. Just for the safety of my staff and myself, we decided to close just a few weeks earlier. And it was a constant struggle because for the first month I was kind of in a state of shock as a business owner. I was like, what are we going to do? We've never had to deal with anything like this before. And what I noticed was my customers continued to support us through that difficult month or two, when we started to be open with them and say, listen guys, if you have the chance to shop with us online, we encourage you to. If you want to support us in the smallest way possible, please do. We are really relying on you as a community to help us float through the next month or two. We did not realize that that month or two was going to turn into a year, a year and a half. But what I did start to see was that there were some critical foundational issues in our business that I needed to address. And so while COVID was, for the bottom line, for the revenue, it was really hard to swallow that pill that we were going to lose a lot of money. It gave me a chance to step back and reevaluate every aspect of my business.
And so with that, I mean, that's amazing. And I know for me as a business owner, and I don't know if you felt this way, Jeff, but when the pandemic first hit, you know, I just thought, oh, it's 2 weeks, maybe a month. Let me pound out everything that I could not do, because before you're doing all the operational things and you just didn't have time. So I took that time to also take stock of my website and revamp it and rebrand and all these things. So did you do those things thinking that I only have a short period of time, this pandemic is going to last? And then again, like you said, here we are a year and a half later, almost, and it's still here. So
the first 2 months, I wasn't even thinking about the website. I was just thinking about how to salvage any bit of revenue that we can get to encourage my customers to shop on the same platform we were on before. But then as I started to read more about the pandemic and the long-term effects of it, I realized this is a unique opportunity for me to really step back, continue to encourage them to shop, but on the back end, I started to think about even our production, because if you think about it, all of our products, all of our jewelry was made in New York City. New York City was on a lockdown for 3 to 4 months. So we couldn't even make a new piece of jewelry. I couldn't even come up with a new collection, even if I wanted to, because I didn't have another location or another resource to go to produce those pieces. So I started to reach out to my community, and I actually got in touch with another jewelry designer out of California. She contacted me, actually we got to talking, and then she connected me to a production in India. And that what happened was I started to work with them a little bit, and I realized, you know what, I can still make a lot of my pieces in New York. But if I come into a point of crisis, or if I need to, ramp up my production and my studio in New York cannot handle the volume, I have a second backup plan. I have a plan A and a plan B, a contingency.
It's fantastic.
And that was, and actually it made me think about everything. Like I said, just all aspects of it. Yeah.
Well, I want to add one part to that because it made me think immediately of my own experience. I did the classic, fight or flight or freeze. I froze. I froze for a while. I was, and I actually think I felt sorry for myself for a little bit. I saw 90% of my business go away. It was scary. We had just bought this farm, and I was like, what are we going to do? Or, what are we going to do? But I think, like you, and we start learning to pivot, and part of it is this show is created because of that time period. And these things that we start realizing that the other big part was the difference between what I actually need and what I want. And the things that we need came first. And then, so anyway, but it's really neat to hear you as a person who said, okay, I'm going to pivot. And
have a redundancy plan.
A redundancy plan,
and that, when you just said everything you said, that reminded me of when I used to work. My first job after I came back from overseas playing volleyball was at an IT company, and I was selling internet access, right? And that was when the internet was booming. I made a lot of money then, I was in sales, but we were selling internet access, T1, big bandwidth, co-location, web hosting services to big corporations, and they always wanted a redundancy plan. Like, so when you think about how the internet works for big companies, if one network goes down, they have to have their services rerouted. So it sounds like this allows you to really put all your backup plans in place and have all that so that if something like this happens again, you're going to be a lot more prepared.
Well, this is neat because the IT thing brought in, you have an IT background as well.
I do.
So let's talk a little bit about that career pivot and something that was a little more stable. What you have some guts, my friend. Talk about that.
So when I got out of college, so I lived in Montreal, Canada. I graduated from McGill. First job out of college, got into this beautiful company called SAP. A lot of my skill set, like the organization, the operation, and all that stuff, it really came from SAP. And I loved the culture of SAP, but the one thing that I couldn't take anymore was the constant reorganization. And anyone that works for a software company, they completely understand what I'm talking about. You've got a new manager that comes in, 6 months later, you have a reorg. And then another year goes by, a new manager. So in those 9 years that I was working for the company, I had 9 different managers.
Wow.
And so I could never really build my relationships for long term.
And I think it's great to note this because here we are on Entrepreneur Show, but you're talking about, and several of our other entrepreneurs talk about their experience with other companies, and Joy talks about this too. Like there's some negative aspects of it, but there's a lot of positive. I mean, I've worked for a lot of companies in my life, and I think I learned some great stuff, especially big companies. One thing I want to ask you about is, now you go from that stable job to a very competitive market.
Yes.
How do you win in that market? And I say win's kind of an aggressive word, but how do you stay afloat in that world? Because you obviously are successful. You have this company that's going and working through COVID. So tell us.
So I think first of all, to be an entrepreneur, you have to be bottom line an optimist, like a die-hard optimist, because if you were a pessimist, there was no way you would take any kind of risk in that business.
That's a good point. So I need to tell my husband I am not as pessimistic as he thinks I am. There you go, husband.
You're an optimist. You're cautious optimist.
Yes, I like that.
Cautiously optimistic. The other thing I would say is that because I had a husband who was very supportive with my, creative passion, and he wanted to see me happy because he saw how unhappy I was in my stable job. He said, you know what, just pursue it. I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen? You'll fail and then you'll get right back up. So you know what, and the risk the entrance to the risk to reward was low. So basically, because we were doing a pop-up, they didn't expect us to sign a long-term lease. We could test the market, see how people were responding to the product, and it was percentage of sales.
See, if you're on the edge of doing something retail, pop-up could be a great way to go.
Exactly,
right?
and I think, work with a community or a development area that is looking for pop-ups. And you know what? Sometimes when an opportunity presents itself, maybe there's a reason it's in front of you. Just take it and see what happens.
Especially the ones that just kind of drop.
Exactly, the ones that drop.
You didn't ask for it, you didn't pray for it, you weren't thinking about it. It's just like, boop, there you go.
So that's sometimes the best opportunity because then there's a reason why that opportunity just knocked on your door.
I want to segue and pivot here a little.
Yeah.
Talk about things that happen in your life. You are a mother. And you have a young baby. You have a toddler now. How is that going, raising a family and raising your business, keeping your business going? Talk about that.
There's a couple of complexities. So the first is obviously running a business. Business in itself is a very complex thing to run, especially if you have people reporting up to you. The second complexity is COVID. Then becoming a mother or getting pregnant, taking maternity, and then having a baby and managing both the business and the baby. So because your business is your first baby and then you have your second baby, you have to be able to give each one equal, But the truth is you can't give both equal amounts of love. Because the business baby has been around for several years now, it's kind of, it's in its toddler.
It's a toddler.
It's a toddler. It's a full walking toddler.
Yes.
Right.
So you could leave it be for a little bit. And I think most of your clients, if they understand that you are a new mother, you're trying to figure things out, they'll give you grace. They won't expect you to do things very quickly like they used to.
Right.
And as long as you communicate that to your staff and to your customer and say, listen, I used to be in the store every day. Now I'm on the store only on the weekends. And my customers understand that. And they don't expect me to be there on a weekday. But if I am, they want to see that baby.
Yeah. Do you feel like you had to give up something in order to be a mother?
Yes. I had to give up the idea of perfection in my business.
What was your routine like before you had your child, but you had your business? And then we'll delve into the journey, and then I want to find out your routine now that you have a child.
Okay,
all right?
This is great. Okay,
Great
this is a great questions. So my routine before I had my daughter, Lumi, was, I would be in the store probably 6 to 7 days a week. That's a lot. I didn't even give myself a day off, and I would be working round the clock. Like I'd be done with the work in the store, and then I would go home and I would work on the website, or I would work on operational stuff. So like the work never ended. I got to travel up to New York or to meet with my vendors constantly. And so, it wasn't, and obviously COVID would have impacted it whether I had a child or not, but I remember being 7 months pregnant going through the trade show, and people were looking at me like I was going to give birth right there and then, and they were terrified. But I was just strolling along, just didn't care. But yeah, I think my routine was very much like 100%, 150% into the business and not really spending all that much time, family or like allocating time to family. Once I had my daughter, there were things that I couldn't do. Like I couldn't go into the store and sell in the store or work on other things, but I could work on the website at home while she's sleeping, taking her 2-hour naps. There are certain tasks that you can manage of your business at home without having to physically be in the office to do it or in the retail space. So, I've left most of the selling now to my staff.
Yeah.
Great.
That's awesome.
You want to talk about the journey?
Yes. Okay, let's talk about the journey. Okay. So the journey. So to be honest, I've always wanted to be a mom, but it wasn't like something that really hit me until I was 35, and everyone around me was having kids and I wasn't. And then, and I was thinking, I was like, oh, it's just because we're not
like really focused on it.
We're not focused on having a kid. So that's probably why it's not happening. Now we gotta and plus at the time I had 2 stores. And so or 2 pop-ups. And I was just like, okay, I don't have time to think about kids. But as time went on, around my group of friends, people started having children, and I was incredibly happy for them. But then I think it was my mom and I had a really honest conversation, and she said, listen, you know, you guys have been married for a while and you haven't had kids. You haven't even, you know, I know that you're trying, like not actively trying, but not being careful. What's going, like, have you thought about going to see a specialist? And then I paused and I said, wow, is it possible that I cannot have kids naturally? And it didn't really hit me until about after I had given up my second pop-up at Tyson's Galleria. And it was, you know, and we had gone to Thailand and we took this like really nice vacation. We were relaxed. We were, you know, connecting, as they say.
Right.
Whatever you want to call it. And when we came back, my cousin announced that his wife was pregnant, and he's a few years younger than me. And that was when it like hit my gut. And I was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
This may not happen that easy. And I wasn't thinking that, because, you know, when you go through life, you're thinking, oh, pregnant, like no problem, we'll get pregnant.
Yeah.
And movies and social culture just makes it seem like it's such an easy thing to go through, and it's such an easy thing that happens. It's just instantaneous. So so it took pause, and then that summer I went to to my doctor and I said, hey, listen, we're trying to have kids, but it's been taking a while. She said, listen, if you have been trying for 6 months and you're already at year 35, let me give you a number of us, like, let me connect you to a specialist. So we went through all these tests. Nothing was wrong. They couldn't pinpoint a reason for why I couldn't biologically have a child. And then the conversation of IVF started. And that was hard because I had heard about it, I was anxious, I didn't know much about it, and started to really look into it. First of all, it's costly. And anyone who's an entrepreneur, that's really hard, because you're already either barely making money or you're covering your costs, but you're, you know, breaking even. And if you are lucky enough that you're making profit, you want to hold on to that profit. But having to go through IVF and realizing, first of all, the cost of IVF.
Because your insurance didn't cover much, right?
And that's the other thing. Most people don't know that IVF is not covered by insurance.
Not covered by any insurance.
For most, and if you're lucky to be working for a corporate company that does, that's great.
That's a blessing.
You're one of the lucky ones, but for a majority of people, it doesn't cover. The other thing that I discovered, which was really interesting, was that there was actually quite a few women that were going through what I was going through. A lot of women who were going through struggling with infertility, but nobody was talking about it.
And we didn't even talk about it.
No, we didn't.
And when we finally did, we realized we were going through it at the exact same time, you know? When we had that discussion, it was just kind of like, I didn't even know much about it, because no one talks about it. And it's almost like when women have miscarriages, you know, we still don't talk about it amongst each other. And I don't know if is an element of shame. Is it an element of fear? Is it, you know, because, you know, we've gone down this path. And so my husband and I, we're on our 5th cycle of trying to have a child. And again, going back to the cost, you know, we've had to come out of pocket for every single cycle that we've had. Insurance hasn't covered a single thing. And we're at the point where we have to decide, do we go the egg donor route, you know? And that's a hard pill for me to swallow, because then it's not my baby, you know, it's not my egg. And I'm still struggling with that aspect of it, you know, but knowing that that may be the only way that him and I could have a child naturally. And so, yeah, it's tough. And I think more women should talk about it and support each other through it, because now that I know what other women were going through, I'm like, oh my God, like I could have been a better friend or been more supportive, you know, or just, I don't know.
I think it's an interesting time we live in, where we're learning to become more open, and yet we find there's more things we don't talk about. Sophie and I were talking about beforehand, just the sharing of roles of culture, because of our culture, and being the breadwinner or being whatever, and then being a business owner as a woman, and then you have this other pressures, but then you also have the motherhood. What does that mean to your identity and all that? So
I think women, especially women who are in the business environment, entrepreneurs, they really seem very isolated because we operate
In
isolated.
isolation.
Right, I was
Isolation.
going to say, as a man in entrepreneurs, it's an isolating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We
to be an
isolate
entrepreneur.
ourselves in business.
Absolutely.
We tend to isolate ourselves in emotion, and we isolate ourselves sometimes even through having a child.
Yeah.
And
That's a
that
good
is
point.
one thing that absolutely I encourage every business owner, female, male, what is it? Doesn't matter if you're in the prospect of having starting a family. If you have someone you can trust, someone you can lean on, kind of like you're looking for mentors.
Yeah.
When you search for a mentor in your business, they're the one that you go to with the deepest and darkest of secrets.
What you're talking about is very intimate, and it's a whole person as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
How do you use these struggles that you've gone through, that journey, and then turn it back to being maybe a better business owner?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm still learning. I still have a long ways to go. But one thing, like I was saying, is that I've stopped trying to make things perfect. The other thing I want to remind entrepreneurs in general, there's a lot of noise.
Yes.
From podcasts to people giving you advice to newsletters telling you how you can run your business better. It's a lot of information to digest, and you don't have the time for it.
Yep.
So what you need to do is just kind of step back and think, okay, here are my 3 things that I want to start doing this year. Like, we're in the beginning of New Year, 2021. I won't have the answers to everything. I never expect to. But just remembering that, whatever you're doing it out of love. And if you're doing it out of love, you will find ways to get into your craft and get really good at it. But don't try to be that perfect person, because there's no such thing.
I think that's a great thing to end on. It's so awesome to meet you, Sophie. And we can find you at Sophie Blake NY. Is there a website or something?
Yes, it's actually pretty easy. It's
Yeah.
just my name, sophieblake.com. It has our product. It has our information about our brand. We actually, one more important thing I forgot to mention is that not only do I highlight my brand, but I also partner with other really amazing female entrepreneur or women-owned brands that do beauty and apparel and home goods. So we're really focusing, even though I like to say I love guys, but women, we tend to beat ourselves down quite a bit. So if I can give you that platform to highlight your product or your story, then that's all that really matters.
If you want to be a guest on our next show and you have a great story, check us out on thehustle.tv.
Don't forget to like us on the link below and subscribe.